If you watch my videos, you probably know that my favorite weapon for solo PvP is the one-handed spear. But would I suggest it to somebody who's not really experienced in PvP yet? Let's talk about that. By the way, this question was inspired by a recent Reddit thread I saw where the top comment read, "One-handed spear is a noob trap. You need too much game knowledge to be effective with it." And this actually made me think. The one-handed spear gives you more tools than any other weapon in Albion Online, at least for solo PvP. And not just in theory, but we're talking about viable, legitimate tools that you can use in a real fight. And this does not only come down to choosing a W spell, although that is a big part of it and the spear does indeed have a good selection of actually useful Ws. Your itemization, your E usage, and the very essence of how you approach any specific matchup or a fight is full of legitimate options. And because of this, many fights become just as much, if not more, about choosing the right tools from your toolbox to address the specific fight or situation in front of you, as they are about the mechanical skill of then applying those tools in a precise way. Now, of course, this is not entirely unique to the spear. On every weapon, you need to adapt to the specific PvP situation in front of you. And there are other weapons with a similarly big variety of options, such as, for example, Death Givers or Carving Sword. But it is the degree to which you have this optionality, and I think also how severely you can get punished for your mistakes, that makes Spear stand out a little bit. Having to constantly make tactical choices in PvP situations with your spells, items, playstyles and so on, makes it so that fights on the one-handed spear usually become much more about your opponent than about you. I say this actually in my spear guide also. Your number one plan on the one-handed spear is to figure out your opponent's plan and then disrupt it as much as you can. And this idea leads us to the first big potential problem of playing the one-handed spear as someone who is new to PvP. You can't play it very well if you don't understand your opponents. On some weapons like maybe dual swords or battle axe, you can be relatively successful by just focusing on one simple game plan that is focused around your build and getting consistently better at executing your plan. You can win some fights by even just clicking every ability, trying to stay on top of your enemy until one of you is dead or invisible. On the spear, you need to understand what your opponent is trying to do with their build. And we're not just talking about your opponent's weapon, although that is of course fundamental, but their whole build. The second aspect making the spear a bit complicated in PvP is the amount of things that you need to be aware of during a fight. There will be spacing issues, your spirit spear stacks, your E, which can serve completely different functions depending on your opponent and the fight you're in, and even the whole way in which you approach the fight. Those things can change, and those things will definitely change from fight to fight. Once again, these are things that apply to every weapon, but to a lesser degree. You can kind of ignore the whole concept of spacing on a fire staff or maybe dual swords and still do relatively well in solo PvP. Because of all of this complexity, it is often kind of unclear what went wrong when you die. And this is a pretty big thing, because the learning curve of Albion, like any worthy competitive game, is kind of steep already. It's difficult to start and get into it, but just like animals, if you have two buttons, one gives you food, the other one gives you a kick in the groin, you're gonna learn pretty fast what to press and progress from there. But if you need to click a specific sequence of 100 buttons to get your food delivered in 3 to 5 business days, your brain is going to struggle to put the lesson together, and it might take you more trial and error in order to get some of the things right. And so on many other weapons, it's easier to learn step by step. Your E was reflected or dodged, you die, you read the ability that reflected your E, next time you try to play around it. It's much simpler in general to isolate specific mistakes or things that went wrong in a fight. And so you can isolate and improve upon those things. And on top of that, even though every single fight is unique, your next 100 fights will look more similar if you play, for example, a fire staff or a warbow as opposed to the spear. So it will be a little bit easier to apply what you learned to your next fight and the fight after that. And so this brings us to the billion silver question. After all of this, is it worth it? Is it worth putting yourself through this? Is there some sort of cake or big reward at the end? And the first simple answer, of course, is that it depends on you and your personality. It's quite possible that you just listened to the last couple of minutes of me talking and you already know whether the spear, fits you or not based on some of the things we described. But I'll give you some more helpful ideas on whether to invest in the spear or whether you should recommend it to others who are trying to get better at PvP. Number one, all of the things that you need to get a better grasp of to be successful with the spear, those things we talked about. Understanding your opponents, adapting, being hyper aware of spacing in a fight, choosing correct spells, all of those things are necessary to be truly successful in Albion Online PvP, on any weapon. If you want to compete in high IP loadouts for big money, there is no way around it. Now, as I mentioned before, you can get away on some weapons for a long time without really understanding all the fundamentals that well. And you can be moderately successful, but the best players absolutely learn, understand, and apply all of those concepts to their PvP on any weapon. The best dual swords players don't click their buttons and just stay on top of their enemy, but they're always aware of what's happening in a fight and their Q stacks, for example. The best fire staff players have a good understanding of everything that we talked about and the kind of tools at their disposal and choosing the correct ones. All of those things that the spear forces you to deal with earlier in your Albion PvP journey, those things are a requirement to be successful long term. Now, in my experience looking at newer players, the spear as a starter weapon or one of the first weapons you play in PvP is more frustrating and less profitable than playing a simpler weapon. But if you want to become the hunter of the mists or just successful in PvP long term, you will need to learn all of those things anyway. So one question that you can ask yourself or the person asking you for advice on what weapon to choose is, would you prefer smaller, simpler lessons step by step, or to be thrown into the deep end right away? We all learn a little bit differently. I can speak from my experience that being forced to overcome this difficulty is by far the fastest that I've ever progressed, actually in any endeavor in life, but as well as any game I've played and Albion Online PvP. I know that for myself, I would always choose this hard, steep learning curve every time, but when deciding whether to suggest the one-handed spear to somebody else, there's one thing that has actually helped me decide, and that is to try to gauge how committed that person is to the game or content that we're talking about. And what I mean by this is, if somebody's clearly just checking out Albion PvP to see what it's like, I wouldn't tell them to pick up the spear. To make it through this steep learning curve, you need to have some inner will or something that keeps you going so that you see through the difficulty. If somebody tells me that they find Albion amazing and perhaps they've already have hundreds of hours, for example, they're clearly enjoying the game and they ask for a weapon to progress in their PvP, I would absolutely suggest to try the one-handed spear. If the person is already serious about being good at PvP, the spear is absolutely a wonderful teacher and also amazingly fun. And in my experience, actually, the more tools you have for a PvP situation, the more fun it becomes. Because, well, you kind of have to solve the problem in front of you. And, of course, any big kill, if you get that big payday, is going to feel fun and rewarding in a different sense, always. But a big thing on the spear, at least for me, has been that when I do win a fight, it feels more rewarding than on a lot of other weapons. Almost always. I still get this feeling after thousands of hours, by the way. It's the feeling that you actually outplayed your opponent in some sort of way. And that's, I think, one of the best feelings in solo PvP. And the spear will present you with a lot of such moments. As we talked about earlier, it's probably not gonna come right away, but after some time. I think more than any other weapon in solo PvP. Only other two ways I've kind of gotten the same satisfaction, so far at least, is Death Givers to some extent, or playing some clearly off-meta builds and getting some victories that way. So is the one-handed spear a noob trap? Inherently, no. No, it's not. But it can become a bit of a trap for someone who isn't serious about Albion PvP yet. And kind of put them off the whole idea altogether. Due to its flexibility, it requires more game knowledge to be effective than other popular weapons, and it's not going to give you as many free wins or lucky breaks. If, however, you decide to get better and you're committed to the learning curve to see what's on the other end, the spear is the best teacher of the fundamentals of Albion PvP. And it can reward you with some of the best moments where you know that you deserve the victory you just achieved. At the end of the day, no matter what weapon you're playing, it's going to be immensely useful to not only talk theory but analyze specific fights. If you'd like to see me analyze some of my fights, check out this video up here. If, however, you're looking for more general ways to improve at PvP, then this video down here is for you. See ya!